Hello, Anne. Thank you so much for joining She Leads today. I am so excited to have you as a guest and just learn from you and share all of your insights with others. So thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
Of course. So, Anne, you are the co-founding partner of Floodgate, a venture capital firm that focuses on seed stage investing in technology companies. Some of your key investments include Lyft, which you were the lead seed stage investor, TaskRabbit, and Refinery29, to name a few. And you're also the co-founding member of All Raise, which is an organization focused on the increasing diversity of funders and founders. And then at Stanford, you're a lecturer in engineering and also the co-director of the Mayfield Fellows Program, which I was honored to be a part of that community. And just to cap it all off, you were also named by Forbes one of the top tech investors of 2020, so congrats. And then also a few years back, just the most powerful woman in startups. So you can imagine my excitement to have you on this show. And so, yeah, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Of course. Okay, so I've done a little bit of research, and I've discovered that at one point you were actually really close to becoming a doctor, to the point where I believe you took your MCAT, but 2 days before you realized, I don't want to be a doctor. And so I'm just interested in that journey. Kind of walk me through that thought process and where you kind of had that leap to be like, no, it's not too late to change. Yeah, and just especially for people like me graduating and trying to navigate their life. Like, what did you learn from that?
Yeah, I think so. I think there are a couple things that I really learned. One was there's sort of this voice that you'll hear from time to time that's like it almost like feels like a voice inside your head, right? And it's sort of a whisper where it's like this is a fit or it's not a fit, and you can't rationalize it. And it's what I realized is it's really important to learn to listen to that voice, because it was that voice that suggested to me, maybe this path that you're on is not the path that you should be on. And part of the reason was the reason why that's so important is because sometimes it's really hard to get off the path. There's a lot of inertia in knowing what the next step is and having it defined for you. And to get off the path doesn't necessarily mean you know what the next step is. And so as long as the next step on the path is defined, it's really hard to get off, especially if the other option is, I don't know, right? And so what was really a strong urge for me, the wonderful part was I had a friend, my best friend in college was applying to med school, and she was on the path to being a doctor. And she was the perfect candidate for being a doctor. Empathetic, caring, wonderfully smart. But she was so like in that direction that I could see why she would make a great doctor. But I could also see why those characteristics weren't necessarily present in me. And so it was just the awareness of my surroundings and then having an awareness of what am I really good at? And one of the things that I've always been pretty good at is memorizing stuff, but I never loved it. And studying for the MCATs is actually a lot of memorization. And I'd gone through organic chemistry, which was a lot of memorization. And I remember thinking to myself, these are not things that I love doing. And I can imagine in med school, there was also going to be a lot of memorization. And so I was pretty good at mapping, like, what do I need to be good at to be great at something? And so I could start to see, like, those are the things that I don't love. Like, there were things that I loved about being a doctor, saving lives and like making a real meaningful difference and doing something that was really important. But I could see that there are 1,000 other people who would be much better at it than me. And so I knew that I needed to find the path that was more suited to me.
Yeah, that's amazing. So you didn't actually know where that was going to go. You just knew that even though you may be good at memorization, you knew that that passion wasn't there, and like you couldn't see yourself being a doctor every day of your life and things like that. So you almost just took that leap. So I'm interested.
Yeah.
Were there people, because pre-med, that's like a lot of classes, a lot of dedication and work. So were there people telling you, no, you're crazy? Like it's quite risky and just a lot to ask to just be like, I'm going to drop it all.
No, actually at that point there were no naysayers and sort of the additional, like, what else do I do?
Yeah.
I was still, I guess, that was the year between sophomore and junior year. And so I still had like one more summer to kind of figure it out. I had invested into a lot of extra classes that I probably didn't need to take. And so that was a disappointment, but it was like, there were science classes that I kind of enjoyed anyway. So it didn't feel like a huge cost, but it did sort of set me down this path of like, oh shoot, like, what do I do?
Yeah. So, okay. So now I kind of want to go back to 2008. Big year for you. In that, so there was a financial crisis going on. You were also completing your PhD in quantitative modeling and computer security at Stanford, and you were pregnant with your oldest daughter, Abby.
No, it was my second child, actually. It was with Aaron.
Oh, really?
My son.
Okay.
Yeah.
So already you had Abby. Okay. So you're pregnant, and then you had this opportunity to now start your own VC firm in Floodgate. So yeah, walk me through that, because most people would be like, this is enough on my plate. So what made you want to start your own VC firm?
Yeah. Well, it was actually sort of a gradual process. So the baby actually came later. I already had Abby. She was 18 months old at the time.
Oh, I see.
And so I had one child, very young. I had, and I had this PhD that I was getting pretty close to finishing. And I had this sort of idea that I wanted to start a company actually in that space. And I ended up talking to a bunch of people who I respected. And one such person suggested that I find an angel investor who knew a lot of startups, and that maybe I could see sort of what the context of the world was. So I'd worked for 5 years before I went back for my PhD. And then I was in the PhD for 4 years at that point. And so I lost a lot of context in the real world. So I took that advice and went to someone who had spoken in one of my classes and asked him if I could come and see all of the deals he was seeing. And so in 2007, I started this project where every Wednesday I would basically go in and see all the deals this angel was seeing, and I'd give him feedback on the things that I thought were right or were not right. We ended up really just enjoying working together. And I felt like I was learning a ton. I was seeing some really interesting things. And in early 2008, just as the financial crisis is hitting, this person, Mike Maples, turns to me and says, well, this isn't the venture-backed startup that you were thinking of, but I think I might have raised a fund, and now it's a backed venture startup. So if you want to join, like, you could be a co-founder here. And never in my wildest dreams did I think that I was going to, go back to being a VC. I'd been an analyst at a venture capital firm right before my PhD. So, it's kind of weird to go right back to the same industry, same kind of job right after you finished, 4 or 5 years of education. But a lot of things had changed in the market, and a lot of things were continuing to change. And I could see that because I was at the forefront of research that was happening, of the way technology was being used, because we were at Stanford. And so you could see that actually financing would change as well. And so because I had that context and because I had this education, I could see that. And I loved working with this guy. He was just so dynamic and smart, and he thought about the world in a different way. And I felt like I could learn from him. And what I loved about him was also he was willing to take this huge risk on me. I was totally unproven. We just knew that, like, we thought in different ways. And I felt like he brought something to the table that would make me think more differently. And so I kind of jumped at that chance and dove in. There were a lot of naysayers at the time saying like, that's kind of crazy and risky. My mom was always afraid I wasn't going to finish the PhD. And so I promised her I would. And so there was a period of my life where it was just sort of one day at a time. Like, what do I make a difference in? Do I make a difference in my PhD thesis? Do I make a difference as a mom? Do I make a difference as an investor? And I would wake up at like 4:30 in the morning to work on my thesis, go to work, come back, be a mom, work again on my thesis, and rinse and repeat. Wow. And by the time, 3 or 4 months passed, then I'm pregnant with my second child. And I ended up defending my thesis 6 weeks after I gave birth to my son.
You're crazy. So first, when I hear that story, there's a lot of things that jump out. But one thing is, even when you're kind of looking for these opportunities, is looking at the people. Like, for instance, you saw that you can learn from, it was Mike Maples, I assume. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so you can learn from him, and you guys think differently, and he would push you. So I think that's really, really important kind of for me, even when I'm thinking of a job. It's who do I want to learn from? And so I'm wondering, were there other, so you said they were naysayers, but I'm wondering, were there other females in VC that you could lean on, or at least like mothers who could relate to what you're going through? Because it seems definitely that you were going through something that not many people can all juggle at once.
Yeah, I mean, I had a few female role models that I really looked to. One was actually, she was a former entrepreneur and angel investor. Her name was Audrey McLean. And she had been teaching MSNE 273 at Stanford, and I was her TA for a number of years. She was sort of this hard-charging woman, and I really adored her for just the vitality she always had. Yeah. And I remember at one point she pulled me aside. She said, you should go do this thing with Mike Maples, but let me tell you, if you don't finish your PhD, you will regret it. And she was probably the one person who just kept at me in terms of, have you finished that PhD? Are you going to do it? What have you done today? And she really made it an important part of my life. And so I really appreciate that. The other person who really made a difference, I remember, is Teresa Gao. At the time she was at Excel. And she was one of the very few women investors who was very successful. And she had done a couple of security investments that had done very well. And she had done some consumer investing that had done very well. And I remember I went to her and I said, hey, I'm new to this, but can you tell me what's required for success? And she just kept it very simple. She said to me, it's actually not terribly complicated. It's hard to do. It's just invest in great companies. And I remember thinking that was probably the most important piece of advice, because people will get lost in the nitty gritty of, you should go networking, you should do these things, like you should, try to, write a blog, you should tweet more. And she was just like, that the crux of it is that you have to find great companies to invest in, and the rest, it doesn't matter. It's a strategy to get there. Right. And, I appreciated that. I appreciate it to this day. And she's still one of those investors that I still look up to.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's almost like the investments will speak for themselves, and that's how.
That's right.
Yeah, that's awesome. So, starting Floodgate, what were some of the biggest challenges you faced? And was there a big learning curve, and like just learning by doing, or kind of how did you get the knowing what to do as a top investor?
It was wildly fun. Yeah. So when you're a co-founder and there's just two of you, I think a lot of entrepreneurs have experienced this too. Like, changing the toilet paper in the bathroom is fun, right? Because it's yours. Like, everything is yours. When we first got started, we were subleasing space from Roxrow Pharmaceuticals. We couldn't even put our name on the door because it wasn't our space. And so it was just it was a time when like I literally had to do everything with Mike. And so, everything now that we have our CFO do, I did. Like I had the Excel spreadsheet that, kept track of all the cap tables of our companies. I was actually in charge of audit. So, it was just the two of us, but we got audited at the end of the year, and Mike told me to take care of it. And there's like some comical stories around this woman who is from like a big, accounting firm. She comes to our office and she sits down and she says, I have to make sure you have right fraud processes in place. And I'm thinking to myself, it's just like the two of us, like what could we possibly have? And she said, how do you know that there's no fraud that happens between you and Mike? And I said to her, well, that's funny because, the main thing that we have is that Mike, when he gave me the credentials to wire money from our bank account, he told me that if I ever ran off to Mexico with the money, that he would hunt me down, not with ordinary Russian mobsters, but the kind that will poison you with polonium. And I think he's half serious. Yeah. So I'm definitely not running off with the money. And this woman was like furiously taking notes. And then she's like, stops. And she's like, wait, is that a joke? And I'm like, no, that's exactly what he told me. You can ask. Oh my goodness. Like stuff like that would never happen anymore. But it was great. Like you're just kind of making stuff up, and the community was really small. There were only like 5 investors in our space. Wow. And so it was a fantastic time. I loved it.
Yeah. So it sounds very similar to the messiness that you have in any startup, and it doesn't have to be. Yeah. So it seems you obviously have that entrepreneurial itch because you said you were deciding whether you should start your own company in computer security. So I'm wondering, did you ever have that regret at one point saying, why didn't I start my own? Just so, because it's almost like when you start your own, you can control the impact in a way. Whereas maybe as an investor, it's like you can control it, but not as directly.
Yeah. I think, that was the sort of what I call the come to Jesus moment for me when I started Floodgate. Was I knew I had to let go of that desire, because an investor can't be investing in their ideas. You're investing in someone else's ideas. And so if you hold on to this notion that you are the operator, you can never actually be an effective investor. And so that's something that I think is very important to me, is that I respect the role of the founder. And in doing so, I had to really put that part of me away and put myself into the founding role of Floodgate. Yeah. And so I put all of that energy into how do I grow my team here?
Yeah. So going into specifics about being a seed stage investor, there's a lot of unknowns because you don't really have the numbers yet, and it's very early on. So I'm wondering, what techniques do you use to really look 30, 40 years down the way to say it's going to be an impact and not just a product that people will love short term? Like what do you go through in your mind to know that?
Yeah, it's funny. We were talking about this today, actually, in our partnership meeting. I think, a lot of times we start off with, here's this inflection. Like we see something rapidly changing because of something else. So it could be a huge technological shift. So when the iPhone came out, that was clearly going to be a huge shift. You could see like other shifts coming with gig workers. So there was something in how people wanted to sort of separate themselves from just regular work opportunities and become more solopreneurs. And so that's actually a shift that we continue to see. So what you're looking for is like a wave. and the very first part of the wave, it looks different from like when the actual tsunami comes, right?
Yeah.
And so you're looking for the signs of why the water's receding and why everything's changing. And then you're looking for the signs of what's the timing for that real wave to come through. And so, a good example that right now people are saying maybe from a regulatory standpoint, you're going to see this huge opportunity in telemedicine. Mm-hmm. And then the debate is whether or not that's going to be in companies that already exist in telemedicine, or if new companies will be created as a result. And so, I think we're still figuring out some of those pieces. But when we think about, forward-looking opportunities, that's what we're thinking about. Like what's the seismic shift that's just happened that then causes a new landscape to emerge.
Yeah. Wow. That's awesome. And then, so I really want to connect kind of what we're going through now with coronavirus and how there's so much uncertainty still, and we don't really know what's going to happen a week from now, a month from now. So do you have any advice kind of for the general public in dealing with this uncertainty? Because I assume that you're kind of used to uncertainty with everything, with investing and just your day-to-day job.
Yeah, I think, one important thing is just to take it one day at a time. Yeah. So there's sort of like, what am I going to do in the next week? What am I going to do in today? Yeah. What am I going to do as a result in the next hour? So just compartmentalizing the impact that you can have. And then the second thing is there's understanding your sphere of control. So there are certain things that you have no control over, and whether or not you worry about them, it won't change the outcome. Yeah. And so you kind of have to choose to only worry about the things that you can have an impact on. And so those are the things that I focus most on is what can I actually impact for myself and how will I make the largest impact on that today? And then you worry about all the other things in the future, like the speculative things. Like when will we come out of shelter in place? Like that's more of a conversation than it is a deep-seated worry that you can have. And then the rest of it doesn't necessarily take care of itself, right? But I think there's a lot to be anxious about. But at the same time, there are clear and present opportunities. And so some of it is, I think, framing it in a more positive light. So I think of this as a great reset, right? It's a reset of our habits, because it calls into question everything that we do on a daily basis. Yeah. It's a reset of work. It's a reset of our finances. It's a reset of our health. And in many ways, it's a reset of our economy. And so the places where we can have the most impact is the work that we do, and then our own personal habits, and revisiting, what are we going to do when we get out of this situation? What habits do we want to keep? What habits do we want to let go of? And what can we do today to impact those things already? Yeah. And I think that opportunity is actually quite powerful. And so that's where I see opportunity. Both as an investor, but also just as a human being.
Yeah, I love that. I think there's so many things to take away from that. And one thing that really stuck out was just controlling the controllables. And that's even a good life lesson, even without everything that's happening now. But it's something that you just have to realize if you can't control it, then it's not worth expending that energy into it and focusing on things that you can control. So I think that's great. So before we get into the more fun questions, I do want to ask you about Allraise and its mission and just the impact that you've seen, how it's impacted females and just increasing diversity today. I'm really interested in that. So yeah.
I think we're only starting to see the impact. I mean, the mission is basically we want to change the dynamics of founders and funders, and we want to create a level playing field for everyone. And we believe that actually, in order to create a level playing field for founders, there needs to be a level playing field for funders. And so, you look around, and even today, the sheer number of female investors is low. Yeah. And you look in a partnership, and they're single digits. And still the overall percentage of women is single digits. And some people believe, if you have one female partner in a partnership and you've checked the check mark and you're good. I would say in general, like, you want to see enough diverse voices within a partnership that all of those different voices that come to the table aren't representative of a particular, stereotype. Like, I don't want to be the person who represents all women consumers at the table, right? And so it's great for me to have another female partner. And so I think for us, it's not just gender, but it's just all the different kinds of voices you can have at an investor's table. How do you get those representations happening? And what I love about All Raise is that we have so many different initiatives that help move us in that direction. The one that I've been most involved in is called Founders for Change. And this was started by Jenny Lefcourt and Aileen Lee. And what we were able to do is we were able to get great founders, whether it was Drew Houston or Brian Chesky or, John Zimmer, all of these individuals to say, hey, it's important for us not only to have a diverse management team, but also a diverse board and a diverse set of investors. And there were actual founders who went on record with the New York Times to talk about the fact that they had faced situations where they could have taken money from non-diverse venture capital firms, and they chose not to even meet with them. And that was a real wake-up call, I think, for a lot of venture firms that were not diverse at all. And so they ended up actually hiring more women. Now, I don't think that the impact has been nearly big enough, but I think that we're starting to see the impact. And so I'm optimistic that we'll be able to see a change over the course of a number of years.
Yeah, I love that mission. So I'm wondering, do you think there's someone that isn't in the conversation right now that should be, to like really drive that impact and to make it that much faster? Or is it just kind of this thing that it's almost a ripple effect that once they see other people focusing on it, then I have to as a founder or funder?
I think allies should all be very much involved in it. I think that men, all sorts, like, hold on for a second. My kids are about to come in. You guys have to be quiet. Abby. Sorry.
No, you're totally fine.
And so it's really amazing when male allies actually will take on that role of having to push gender diversity. What I think actually becomes really interesting is when you have, as an example, like I often will take meetings with female entrepreneurs where I'm pretty sure I wouldn't make the investment, but I want to help give them advice. And it would be great if men would do that too.
Yeah.
Because then they also shoulder the burden of taking time out of their calendar and not just always being go about the deals that they're about to do.
Yeah.
And so, I'm always amazed by, like, when I ask for that help, people are willing to do it. But sometimes, like, it takes asking, and it would be great if I didn't have to ask. The other thing is just the idea that, there are certain things that I will always get asked to do. So as an example, like sexual harassment policy. I don't want to always be doing the sexual harassment policy. So a male partner should raise their hand to do it. Right. And so I think, it's important for people who are in the majority to think about what they can do proactively that supports the minority voice.
Yeah.
And I think that actually is a meaningful difference.
Yeah, I think that's really true and definitely important. Okay, Anne, I could literally go on and ask you 100 more questions, but I won't. So, last 2 questions. One,
okay.
What is a passion or hobby that you have that's completely unrelated to your work?
A passion that I have that's unrelated to work?
Yes.
I love playing piano.
Oh, yeah.
So I'm terrible at meditating, but I feel like the only time when I'm actually pretty focused on something, nothing's going through my brain, is when I play piano. Yeah. And so I love doing that.
And you feel like present during it. That's great.
I do. I really feel present. It's something I've been doing since I was 4, and I didn't practice as much in the last, I would say, 10, 15 years, but sort of picking it back up has been really fun.
Yeah, nice. And then my last question is, what is a fun or weird talent that you have that no one else really knows about? And I'll go first. So what I've done is throw blueberries or grapes into my mouth. And it's definitely easier with a partner, but it's just me. So here we go. All right. So here's a blueberry. Okay. There you go.
That is pretty amazing. So I can type the alphabet in less than like 4 seconds.
Oh my goodness.
If I practice. Yeah.
Wow.
I think it's related to the piano thing, but I discovered this in junior high when I was actually taking a typing class.
Yeah.
And we had to do an alphabet test. And then, of course, I asked the teacher, how fast does anyone ever type the alphabet? Because the requirement was like under 15 seconds or something. And I was like, that's ridiculous. Anyone can do that. And he said, I don't know why. And I said, do you think anyone's ever typed in less than 5 seconds? He's like, I don't think so. So I'm like, great, I'm going to try. And I got it in under 4 seconds.
Insane. So in junior high, you got it. Like you didn't even.
No, and then I've had to prove it to my kids.
So you've kept up this talent.
Yeah. So then I just have to practice a couple times and then I'm able to do it.
I think we can also tell your competitive energy through that. So I love it. I think that's great. So Anne, really thank you so much. I've loved this, and I'm just so excited for other people to hear your story and just the lessons you've learned. So thank you for being on She Leads.
Thank you.
It. Of course.
Thanks for pulling this together.